Welcome to another episode of Today's Author. My name is Kevin Tacci, and I will be your host for this segment. What do we do here? We talk a little with local authors, folks who have taken the time to tell stories and share them with the readers. Today, we are very privileged to be speaking with a gentleman who is a New York Times best-selling author and has written several books, and we're here to talk about his new book. Well, one of his new books, Riding with Evil. We have Mr. Dave Wedge. Dave, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. How are you, Kevin?
Pretty good, pretty good. I call it new, but it's been out for a while now.
It's been out for a couple of years, yeah. But the book seems to have quite a shelf life. It's one of those genres, we'll get into it, but it's about bikers, and there's not that many books in that genre, so it's one that people that like that genre keep finding it and rediscovering it and recommending it to friends. So the book's been out there for a while, but it's doing really well, so it's been fun to see.
You've written multiple books, co-written books. What's it like to be a New York Times best-selling author?
Well, I had a journalism career for 20 years. Worked in newspapers, Taunton Gazette and Attleboro Sun Chronicle and the Boston Herald for 14 years, and I always wanted to write books and get into movies and things like that. That was always my goal. So to be able to just get my first book published alone was a big accomplishment. And I had some opportunities early in my career to write other books that never kind of panned out. So just to get that first book published was a huge accomplishment for me. But then to parlay that into a writing career and be able to write some books that have done pretty well and have a couple of New York Times bestsellers, it's a dream come true for a kid like me that just wanted to write, Yeah,
you wrote a book about the Boston Marathon bombing, right? Ice Bucket Challenge, right? You've also done one in regards to Whitey Bulger. What's it like to kind of come up with a concept, have a writing partner, and then being able to tell a story?
Yeah, so, my writing partner that I've written with several of the books you mentioned is Casey Sherman, another New York Times best-selling author, great friend. We've become, like brothers, really. We've written 7 books together now and had a lot of success with them. And it's been exciting, and I'm a nonfiction writer, so I write true stories, a lot of true crime, but also we veer off it a little bit, like Ice Bucket Challenge. That's not crime, but it's a nonfiction story. It's a beautiful story about the young man who created the Ice Bucket Challenge, Boston College baseball player Pete Frates. And then we also did, the book on Deflategate and Tom Brady. So that was you could call it true crime, some might, but it certainly did turn into a courtroom drama. So that was not that far of a departure, but it wasn't Whitey Bulger and bikers, So for me, it's really, I just try to find subjects that have a lot of heart and, stories of redemption, overcoming obstacles, overcoming odds. People love an underdog, so I love to find those stories and mine them. And but the characters have to be really rich, like a kid like Pete Frates or Tom Brady, or even the FBI agent that tracked down Whitey Bulger. A female agent from the Midwest named Noreen Gleason. That Whitey Bulger's worst nightmare, getting caught by a woman. So things like that really kind of get me excited.
You wrote this book with Ken Croke. He's the retired ATF agent who is kind of at the heart of this story. How did you meet him, and what was it like, initially hearing the story?
Yeah, so Ken he was stationed in the Boston office of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, federal agent. So his job would be to, track down gun trafficking, explosives, some drugs, things like that. And he had done some undercover biker work. Now, I met Ken from actually playing hockey. I played, pickup hockey, men's league, and I used to play on Friday mornings down in Bridgewater with a bunch of ATF guys because they have an office right down the street in Lakeville. So 8 o'clock in the morning, a bunch of the ATF guys would play, and somehow I found my way into that. And so I kind of knew who Ken was, but I didn't know him very well. I got a call from one of the guys that played with us a couple years after. It was actually right after we finished the Whitey Bulger book. And he said, you remember that guy Ken? And he described him, and you can't miss Ken because he's 6'4", bald, goatee, giant dude, what you picture a biker or an NFL linebacker to look like. And he said, "You remember that guy Ken?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "He's got a hell of a story. You should meet with him." And I said, "All right." So I was finishing up the Whitey Bulger book at the time, and he said, "Let's meet for a coffee." So we met down at the Middleborough Rotary. There's a Dunkin' Donuts, and I went in, and it's one of those things where, a lot of people, I get those calls a lot. People are like, "Oh, he's got a great story. You got to hear it. You got to hear it." But it's that one call you don't take that you miss it. So I'm glad I went to that coffee because, I walked in and sat down with Ken and, we reconnected and put two and two together. Yeah, I remember we played hockey together and, got comfortable with each other, and he started telling me the story about what he went through. And within 15 minutes, my jaw was on the floor, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And he's like, "No." And I was like, he's like, "What do you think? Do you think this is something?" I said, "Yeah, I think we have a book." And he said, "You think so?" I said, "Absolutely." So we got working on it, and took about 2 years. We partnered up, and here it is.
I think the thing that, from reading the book myself, I'd be curious as to the notes, because this is somebody who had to be in character, at first as a prospect, and then working his way up the ranks in the Pagan Motorcycle Gang. That he probably had impeccable notes for you to be able to work with. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about the story, and the reason why it is a story, is because the thing with the Pagans was they're the rivals of the Hells Angels.
Right.
Very violent outlaw biker gang, smaller than the Hells Angels, but more violent law enforcement will tell you. No one had ever infiltrated the gang, law enforcement. The Hells Angels have been infiltrated many times. Infiltrated meaning a law enforcement officer got in and became a member of the gang. That had never happened before with the Pagans. Ken's the only one that ever did it. So that was number one. That was like, made me sit up and take notice, like, all right, we got a first here. So that's a great piece of the story. But yeah, his memory is like an iron trap. He didn't forget anything. And he had a lot of notes, he had a lot of reports that we relied on. I also did interviews with other folks who worked on the case. His family, friends, things like that. So there was, no end to the material for the book. I mean, we could have written it, another 300 pages if we wanted, but, the story, I think, as it's written, gives you a good indication of what Ken went through.
It's described in the Amazon notes as Sons of Anarchy meets The Departed. I kind of took away from a little bit more that maybe Donnie Brasco should also be added into that as well, because there's a family component in there.
Yeah, there is, and that's a big part of the story too, and that's another reason why I really liked it, because it's not just a story of cops and robbers. It's a story about a guy who sacrificed 2 years of his life with 3 little girls at home in Massachusetts and moved down to New York to live with a bunch of bikers, and he did that in the interest of justice. He did that to keep people safe, and a lot of people like to criticize the police these days and that stuff, but, you read a book like this and you realize the sacrifices that these people make. And, Ken's wife, she was a retired ATF agent as well, so she had lived that life. She had done undercover work, so she knew the stakes. And, the thing with this is, like, when you set out to do an undercover operation like this, you don't say, all right, we're going to do it for 2 years. It just kind of unfolds. It could be 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years, or 2 decades. You don't know. So as the case goes on and as you read the book, you learn how Ken just kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and doors kept opening to him because of how good he was at playing the role of being a biker. He ends up, becoming an actual patched member of the gang, and then rises through the hierarchy of the gang. So it's really a testament to that old school law enforcement attitude of really getting in character. And, that's kind of the only way to catch these people. They're smart. They don't put things in emails and data, like a lot of criminals make mistakes that way. The bikers aren't like that.
Yeah, you depicted that well in your storytelling, and kind of talking about how the Pagans were constantly testing, individuals who are looking to become a part of the gang before they're even, patched in. That they're always testing them as someone who is a prospect. Yeah,
the prospect process is horrifying. It's hazing on steroids and more. Prospects are killed. They disappear.
Yeah.
And, someone like Ken, who's a tough guy, and carries himself with a lot of dignity and respect, to be humiliated by these guys and challenged and, belittled wasn't easy for him to take, but he did it again in the interest of justice. He took it because he had the bigger mission in mind. But it's a pretty terrifying process that the prospects go through, and I think, Ken tells some great stories about that in the book.
You mentioned about doing interviews. Did you happen to have a chance to interview Mike Sullivan at all? I know Mike Sullivan, who is the director of ATF at one time.
Yeah, he was the ATF director at one point, and I believe he was head of Homeland Security here in Boston.
He gave the thumbs up for this thing to go forward.
Yeah, Mike was involved in the case, and Mike I knew from, he was a Plymouth County DA in Brockton, my hometown, and so I've known Mike. I mean, I've probably known Mike since, I started as a journalist. He was probably one of the first DAs I ever met. Yeah. And he's been great to me over the years. So when I was doing this book and I saw his name in some of the court, documents and reports, I immediately called him and told him, and he was like, he had nothing but glowing things to say about Ken. And, Mike talked to me for the book and gave me some great information. And, from the bureaucratic side of the complexities of a case like this, because remember, Ken's out there alone. He's got a cover team, it's called, that's nearby, but they might be 5 miles away, or they might be 10 miles away. So he's really on an island. A guy like Mike Sullivan, his decisions really carry a lot of weight, because if something goes wrong and Ken gets killed, gets outed, the case falls apart, a guy like Mike Sullivan wears that. So there's a lot of risk all around for everybody, and that's a big part of the story as well, is the cloak and dagger sort of aspect of the behind-the-scenes operations of a major law enforcement like the ATF.
It's interesting that you say that, because there were multiple times that the Ken's undercover work nearly came to an end. Not only one time when he was no longer a prospect, right? That and then they wanted him back, to changing ATF offices, to having faulty recording, because they wanted him to do recordings, and knowing that they were scanning them to see if there were any recording devices. He had to be careful. Right. And even being thought to be a rat at one point in time, or a cop. What was it like to transpose those 2 years that Ken went through, undercover?
Well, all my books are challenging, but there was a big challenge here to really separate fact from fiction, and a lot of it is, reliant on Ken's memories, but also there was a lot of corroborating evidence in reports and, other interviews and things like that, news clippings, things, because there was a lot of news coverage of the case at the time. It was fascinating to learn from Ken, and through my research, how he managed to stay undercover and not have his cover blown. There was many, many, many times during the story, those 2 years where his cover could have been blown pretty easily, and the right thing happened at the right exact moment to save him, really. One other thing, Ken told me many times during the writing of this book, and I think it's laid out pretty good in there, he wasn't just worried about having his cover blown. He was worried about making the case. So here he is living undercover as a biker, trying to make the case. Then he's got to take notes to build the case, to get the evidence, collect the evidence and hide the evidence, hide his notes so the bikers don't find it. He's also worried about getting killed by a Hell's Angel, because the Hell's Angels and the pagans are all the time at war. Sure. If you see a Hell's Angel, they're obligated to confront you. And then number 4 is he was always terrified of getting killed on the bike, because people don't think about that, but these guys, they don't exactly follow the rules of the road. They're on crystal meth, they're drinking, they're on speed, they're doing drugs, and they're driving for, 10, 12, 14, 20 hours at a time across country in the cold weather on a huge giant bike at night. So it was a terrifying experience for Ken, and he saw a lot of accidents. A lot of guys almost get killed. He had some close calls. Yep. So he literally, for those 2, and he's got his family back home. Yeah. So he's got those 5 factors every day for 2 years. It was mentally exhausting for him, to say the least.
Did you ever sense talking with him, or do you feel that you were able to put it in the book that Ken contemplated maybe removing himself, that maybe he was getting either in too deep? And let's not forget, he has a wife and he has 2 daughters, and worrying about their safety and anything getting back home.
Yeah, he was absolutely worried about that, and I think, there was, he set out when he went on the mission, he said, I'm not doing this to just take down a couple of guys for like stealing bike parts or something. He said, if we're going to do it, and I'm going to invest my life like this, I want to go to the top. I want to get the top guys. And his goal was to get guys from the mother club. So he was resolute in that mission, and he stuck with it. I don't want to ruin the story for everybody, but he stuck with it. But suffice to say, there was many bumps in the road along the way, and there was many, very, challenging moments for him where he wanted to extricate, or ATF, more importantly, the ATF wanted to pull him out. And he actually had to fight to stay in several times because there was people that said it's getting too dangerous, you're going to get killed, or your cover's going to get blown, things like that. So it's a wild, wild ride.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially when he had to change offices, because he was actually ordered to be more so down in New Jersey, if I'm correct.
It was New York, Long Island, yeah.
And that, and he's working with, another office, and individuals who aren't necessarily like-minded, and who want to do things differently, or maybe they're just looking to, they don't have the same mindset. And I saw it when I was reading the book. I kind of felt as though, as I read it, I'm like, I hope this doesn't end up being the undoing. And again, I'm not going to give away anything in this book, but if you haven't had a chance to read it, it's a fantastic read. I'm kind of hoping, I'll ask my question at the end, that there might be more to this down the road somewhere. But he was innovative, because this is somebody who had to be careful as far as committing felonies himself. I know that there was a gun buy, that he had to go through the office and go through the certain processes, and then they actually had to take the gun and do things to the gun, to even making sure that if somebody's going to get hurt, that he somehow, if he had to do a beat down on somebody, that there was a way that he had to do it.
Yeah,
and he was an innovative guy.
Well, there's rules of engagement, and he's living in a lawless world, but he's a law enforcement officer, so he's got to. You get a special dispensation from the bureau when you go into an undercover situation like this, where there's levels that you can commit certain felonies to a certain level. Like you can buy guns and buy drugs. You can't sell them, because then you're putting them back into the community. But you can buy them, so things like that. And with the violence, there's an expectation that he has to defend himself, and he has to give the appearance that he's part of the gang. So if he has to punch someone, he can get away with a punch, but can he take a lead pipe to someone and crack their head open? Like, no, those guys do it all the time. Ken couldn't do that. So there were several situations we describe in the book where Ken was involved in violent altercations, and he had to be strategic. Thankfully, he's a huge athletic guy, so he could figure out ways out, like fake punching or pretending to miss. A couple times he smashes his hand on the ground. A couple times he takes some blows from other people that were meant for someone that would have maybe killed that other person. So he took a lot of strategic actions to protect himself, protect other people, and follow the law. Now, it's a gray area, though, and it's a dangerous world. He's living with people that are complete animals, and it was a lot for him to handle at times.
He's a heck of an actor too. I mean, he didn't get his nickname Slam for nothing.
Right.
As to how he was able to depict something, and other club members go, "Wow, did you see that?"
Yeah. He's like I said, he's a huge guy. So, he got his nickname from helping out the gang with, they're beating up some guy for some reason, and Ken chased the guy down. That's kind of how he made his bones with the club. Was he chased this guy down and he threw him down off a porch, and the guy slammed on the ground. So the gang called him Slam. From then on, and that was his nickname on his patch. It says Slam. So.
Was there anything about his undercover experience that surprised even you? Somebody who's a reporter, somebody who's been a writer. Anything surprise you during?
Yeah, there was a few things. I mean, number one, just the fact that this stuff still goes on in such a clandestine fashion. We live in a digital world where everything's on video, everything's on phones, everything. But this was only, it was 2009 to 2011. So it wasn't that long ago, but it was pretty shocking to me that, they still operate these ways, and, this is truly the only way to catch them in the act of doing these things is by going undercover physically. The other thing that really shocked me was there's a scene in the book where Ken goes down when he's in the gang, and they're walking on the boardwalk in Wildwood, New Jersey, and they're shaking down the bar owners. They're literally going into the bar, and paper bags of cash are being handed to the gang for protection. And Ken helped collect that money and was part of that whole operation. I was shocked to find out that that still goes on in this day and age. I mean, that's stuff you see in the old gangster movies, but and I pressed Ken on that a lot, and it's in the book. I asked him, I said, well, how, why would they do this? He said, because those guys, they might not act violently right then, but if they don't pay them, they'll just haunt the place. They'll stay there forever. They'll scare their customers. They'll put them out of business. And it goes on. It goes on. These shakedowns happen right to today.
So today's discussion, Ken is retired from the ATF, but is he still a wanted man by the Pagan Motorcycle Club?
Well, there was a price put on his head after the case ended. There was actually two. There was a $25,000 bounty on him, and then a $50,000 bounty. Neither has ever been collected because Ken's still alive and well. I'm not going to say where he is. He's not technically in hiding, but he's not out there, going on the jumbotron at the Bruins games, and he's not at, he's not on social media. He lives a low-profile life. I wouldn't say technically he's a wanted man, but there's certainly, if pagans could find out where he was, I think that would be problematic. So he's not looking to engage any pagans, to say the least.
I teased this during an earlier question. What are the chances of this book, there being a screenplay written and this becoming a movie? I think this would be a fantastic movie, or maybe even a series.
No, it's great, and that's always my goal with everything I write. And we are actually, we partner with some producers that are developing it now, and we're in those discussions now. I hope to be able to give some news soon on it. But I agree, and these producers think it's a fantastic feature film, so I think it's going to be good.
I think you and Ken did a terrific job in kind of taking the reader through, and there's so many different points where I was wondering, is he going to make it out alive, or is there going to be a pot of gold at the end of the legal rainbow here? Again, you'll have to read that to find that out. Where can folks get copies of this these days?
It's in every bookstore, Barnes and Noble, and I always encourage people to go to local independent bookstores, but it's obviously on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com and all those places as well. So.
How is writing this book any different than some of the other books that you've been a part of?
Well, this one I didn't do with Casey, so that was that was a new thing for I did this with Ken. I wrote a lot of the book, most of the book myself, and told it in my storytelling. So it was refreshing to be able to kind of have that freedom to write on my own. Obviously, Ken edited and influenced it, and provided me the content, and it was great. He was great to work with, and. It was important to me that I got his story right because it's his life. So that was a great. We had some disagreements at times, but we worked them out, and we're friends, and we're both very happy with the book. It's done very well, and we're working together on the movie side of things. So I couldn't be prouder of it.
How do you feel you've grown as a writer since your first book?
Yeah, so, I think we're going to get to my next book, but I mean, this next one is the first one that I truly did alone. And it's, all these other books have prepared me for this. So, I started writing newspaper articles as a, 23-year-old kid out of college, covering local high school softball and basketball. And then I get into covering the courts, and then I get into writing music, and then I get into politics, and now I'm covering world events for the Boston Herald and traveling, around the country to cover these major news stories. So every step I've taken has helped me grow as a writer, and every book is a new journey. And that's how I look at it. And, I think I've gotten more comfortable. I think I found a voice that works for me, that I have a very direct storytelling sort of style where I try not to convolute it with language that's not necessary. I try to, the less is more thing is kind of my path, I think,
Okay. You teased it. You talked to us, so you got a new book coming out next June. This is about the late boxing champion, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, his early years.
Yeah, so I grew up in Brockton and, met Marvin
both
when I was
did.
a
You
little
don't
kid. Yeah. So,
You don't have to hide that.
Yeah, exactly. So, so I grew up, my dad was Rocky Marciano's paper boy. So you grow up in Brockton, everyone's got a connection to Rocky
Sure.
and or Marvin, usually both. So growing up with that legend, I always knew that, Marvin was a hero and an icon and all that stuff. But as I got to this, next period of my life where it's like time to write my next book, a Brockton cop friend of mine, actually, Mike Cesarini, suggested, why don't you look at Marvin, the relationship with Goody and Pat and that sort of, story. It's a great story. No one's ever really told that story. So I started looking into it, and I found that it was a fascinating story that had not been fully told. There's been a couple of books written about Marvin, but they were more about his boxing life.
Yeah.
So I decided to focus on his early life, how he came out of Newark. A lot of people might not know he was born in Newark, grew up there, lived there till he was 13.
Right.
When the family moved to Brockton, they escaped horrible riots in Newark. So that to me was like, how do I tell that story? So I did incredible archival research, a lot of interviews, and I tell the story about how Marvin and his family left Newark, the riots, got to Brockton, how he met the Petronelli brothers and starts fighting, and then goes on to fight with the Petronellis against the corrupt boxing world of the 1970s and 80s, and finally gets his world title shot. And his world title shot is against a guy who's supported by a white power group called the National Front. Marvin wins that fight in Wembley Arena in London. After he wins, he gets pelted with bottles.
Yeah.
It was one of the ugliest moments in sports history. And that's not a spoiler for the book, because when you read the book, it's absolutely incredible how it all unfolded. And Marvin led an incredible life. And then after that Minter fight, he went on to become the greatest middleweight of all time, in my opinion, one of the greatest boxers of all time.
Yep.
But that journey out of Newark to winning that fight in London is, to me, what tells you why Marvelous Marvin Hagler was marvelous.
I bet you can't wait for that book to hit the shelves.
Yeah, I get chills right now. I'm very proud of it. As a Brocktonian, it was a huge responsibility for me to get it right. And I think I did. I think when people read this book, it's going to make them see Marvin in a whole new light. And I think people are going to be even more proud of Marvin than they were before.
Excellent. Anything we haven't touched upon that you want to just touch upon before we say goodbye to our audience?
No, I think, it's great to be here with you, Kevin. I love everything you do, and you're a true value to the community, and the community should be lucky that they have you and journalists like you out there covering, culture stuff, but news and politics, and it's such an important thing. It's a sadly dying art in some ways.
It is.
But I love that you carry that torch, and you're a great guy to have me on. So thank you.
Well, thank you for talking with me about Writing with Evil, one of your latest books, and
I'll come back on when the movie's coming out.
The movie, or you can also come back on and talk a little bit about the Hagler book.
I would love to.
Excellent.
Sure.
We want to thank you for tuning in to today's author. Again, bringing you some of the folks who are putting pen to paper and telling stories, and we share their stories and tease them, so maybe you'll go out and check out the book, whether it's a hard copy or maybe it might be on a tablet, or even check out their audiobooks. Until our next conversation with our next author, have a good day.